Welcome back, everyone, to the Ryan Bakey Show. Today, I want to talk about why I decided to buy a $2.5 million accounting firm in Los Angeles. Now, there's a lot of things that were leading up to this, a lot of decisions that I had to make personally, as long as with friends, mentors, decision makers, things like that. But to give you a little bit more background, I had basically within 3 years from zero to 3 million in 3 years from basically organic audience, organic social media. I started posting online, the whole podcast. Obviously, I've been doing the podcast for 3 years, the Facebook group, the live events, the speaking, the engagement, the webinars every single month, the events. It's a lot of work to do to build a brand that big to get to 3 million. A lot of people think that it was some type of fluke or some type of oh, he doesn't deserve it, or oh, he must be buying firms if he's going to hit 3 million. So I just want to set the record straight right there. I never bought a firm to get to $3 million. I had not bought any firms until I hit the $3 million revenue mark. But now everything's changed and everything's different. People aren't building trust as quickly anymore online. There's so many talking heads online. There's so many gurus and influencers and quote unquote tax experts online. And there's so many of these talking head figures that in order to get your message out there, it is so hard. And if you're going to go market to a colder audience, it's just taking so longer to nurture those people that are cold and get them to buy something. We started running paid ads. We spend 8 to 10 grand a month in just paid ads. And, those types of converts versus people who are organic. It's a lot easier to sell to organic than paid ads, of course, but it's just taking forever now. I'll give you a little bit of background on the firm. So my birthday was March 1st. I got on a plane the next day on that Sunday, and I spent a week in Los Angeles meeting the team members, meeting some of the clients, the atmosphere, getting a feel for the systems and processes that were in place or not in place for that matter, and just getting a kind of a lay of the land on the culture, the work-life balance of the firm, etc. And to kind of prevent, privacy, I will probably leave certain parts of the deal out in terms of who it was from, the name of the firm, the purchase price of the firm, the deal structure, although maybe I will save that for another podcast. But I guess my top three reasons why that I felt inclined to go and buy a firm rather than continue to build is number one, I felt like the organic reach was tapped out to a certain extent. So, the total addressable market, Alex Ramosi talks a lot about that, like the total addressable market for exactly the type of service and offering that I was doing, I felt like I had tapped out to an extent. And again, there might have been people that are in my audience, love what I do. They just will never sign up because they feel like they already know it. I mean, there's so many other variables there, but it just kind of felt like it was really hard to continue going down the organic growth route given the timing of everything. Like we were going into an election year. We still have consumer sentiment being down with the tariffs and what's going to happen. I hate to say this, but if you got laid off recently in a job, there's a good chance that you never get that job ever again, at least at that company. I mean, the amount of companies that are moving towards AI and robotics and digital first, I mean, it's not a surprise that, consumer sentiment, there's a lot of fear, definitely a lot of fear in the market right now. In the stock market, fear in the job market, fear in overall economy. And with that, it just makes it a little bit harder to sell to organic. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to think about, well, what if I just acquired and I can get that instantly? I think it's quicker to grow through acquisition than it is to build organic. Now, don't get me wrong, you're always going to want to build an organic sort of pipeline, like build through organic, because it's going to allow you to build the most trust with your customers, build the most sort of organic presence. I think, 5-10 years from now, we're not even gonna have resumes. It's just gonna be our social media handle. I feel like that's what it is now anyway, is you don't even ask anybody anything anymore. You're just looking at their social media account. And it's quicker to grow through acquisition. I can snap my fingers, do one deal and pretty much double the size of my revenue, double headcount, double basically everything through one acquisition. So it felt like my organic reach was a little bit tapped out. I believe it's quicker to grow through acquisition, and it is also cheaper to grow through acquisition. Okay. Now we're going to get into that kind of the specifics of that on this exact podcast, but there's a lot of stuff I'm going to leave out for future episodes to kind of chalk that up for different days. But I guess before we kind of talk about the pros of the deal and more specifics on these, you have to be able to argue both sides, right? So I had to think about because if you would have asked me a year or two ago, I would have never bought a firm. It wouldn't be worth it. The clients suck, the people suck, etc. But within the last 1 to 2 years, I've definitely changed my mind on firm ownership and how I see growth and how I see buying firms. But before we talk about the pros of the deal, you can't argue one side without knowing everything else about the other side. I used to do debate speech in high school. I used to be on the debate team. Well, one time we had a debate practice. We used to do these once a week during season. And our coach at the time, Mr. Hamlin, he's like, "Okay, you guys are going to argue why Reaganomics is going to work or why did it work. And then you guys over here are going to argue against it, why it doesn't work. You guys are going to argue this side, you guys are going to argue that side." And I had to argue the four why Reaganomics works, or trickle-down economics, right? And then the other side of the class, the other people had to argue against it. And so we come back a week later, we're all prepared to do our side of the speech, and he sits us down and he goes, "Okay, you guys that were going to argue for it are now arguing against it. You guys that were going to argue against it are now arguing for it." And everybody was kind of like in this chaos or dishevel and wondering why he pulled a trick on us. Why did he lie to us? Why did he do all these things? And he goes, "Well, you can't argue your side without first knowing the other side more than they do. The key to winning the debate is acknowledging the reasons why you believe your opponent has those feelings or believes what they believe based off the statistics, but you also have to be able to counter that even greater. So you can't argue one side without arguing both sides. And for a long time, I was just arguing the one side of why I think organic growth is the best and why I would never buy a firm. And then I started, researching and reading a lot of books. Like I read tons of books. I read Waste Managers. It's about the guys who built the waste management company. I read Buy Them Build, like attended a bunch of conferences about buying businesses. And once I was able to open up to both sides, I actually saw that the side of buying was cheaper, quicker than the side of organic growth. Now there's things that you get with organic growth that you don't get with buying a firm, and we can talk all about that. But you can argue one side without knowing both sides, and in fact you have to know the opponent's argument greater than they do themselves, and only then can you actually argue because you know both sides, right? So you can't argue a point without knowing both sides, and I think this goes for everything, for or against, left versus right, Republican, Democrat, rich versus poor. Like you can't argue without knowing both sides, okay? So I guess first pro is that it's quicker to grow through acquisition than it is by organic. Or organic slow. It takes time to build trust. 30 conferences in 3 years, I think. 30 like in-person speaking engagements in 3 years, which it's nothing compared to what some people do who have double, triple, quadruple size of my audience. But it is, it's not as quick. Like it takes a long time to build an organic audience. Like you have to show up every day. You have to build a Facebook group. You have to send the emails every day. Like this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And for me, it took me 3 years to get to where I was at the $3 million range. But like I said, I felt capped. Like I felt like that was as far as I was gonna kind of go on that front. And I decided that I thought it would be cheaper and quicker to acquire. If anybody's listening to this right now that's like thinking about branching off on their own, or maybe you work at a big four, or maybe you're working at an accounting firm and you just don't like the culture, like I would 100% like start your business, start your CPA firm, but do not leave acquiring out of the picture. I think it'd be way easier for you to acquire a firm than it would be to start your own. See, the problem is when you start your own firm and you're trying to scale it and you want to get it to a certain profit metric, because in order to be like an actual firm owner, sure, you'll have work-life balance because you're the one that's calling the shots, you're setting up the meeting appointment times, etc. But like, are you going to make the amount of money that you actually want to make? Or would it have just been better to go work for the man or get that W-2 paycheck, right? I say this all the time, like there's certain people in this world that if they need $5,000 a month to live and they can figure out how to make $500 an hour, they will only work 10 hours a month and be like, great, I'm set. Guys like me or people that are listening to this podcast, if you figure out how to make $500 an hour, you're like, how do I work 100 hours a week, right? Problem is, most accountants, I would say arguably the sub 800,000 to $1 million revenue range, they don't have a business, they just have a high paying job. Okay. So let's say you're making 450, 500K revenue. You have maybe one admin assistant, that's helping sort emails, taking some admin calls. And yeah, you might be netting 400 grand, but you're the one that's doing all the work. Like you're probably the one preparing the tax returns, reviewing the tax returns, communicating with the client. Like you're the one that's doing all the work, and more power to you if that's what you want to do. But what happens when you want to go out of town for 2 weeks or take a vacation, or you want to stay at home for the birth of your child? Like all these things requires you to have an actual business rather than just a high paying job. And so, my argument for the people that are floating in the 4 to 500K range, and yeah, they're netting 300, 400 grand, amazing. Like that's way more than what some people will ever make in their life. And I've been there before. But why not get to 1 million? So that way you can afford to hire 2 admins, 2 preparers, 1 reviewer, one manager slash person that communicates with the clients for you. So then maybe you elevate to the role of just salesperson, like you're the brand of the firm, you're just selling. And then you have your admin staff, you have your tax preparation staff, you have your tax manager or your reviewer. You got $1 million firm, you got 4 or 5 staff, and you're still netting at least 500,000 at that level. Like you're going to net 500,000, which is going to be more than you were netting before, and you're not doing a lot of the work. The only work that you're doing at that point is selling, right? And so that would be my argument. Like, if you're at a 400K, 500K revenue, why not go and buy another one similar size, combine forces together, and now you're at 1 million, and you can actually work the economics to say, well, now you actually have a business rather than a high paying job. That is what I would personally do. So that's what I noticed too, is like it's quicker to grow through acquisition. So now, by the end of this year, like I will have done at least $5 million in revenue across my CPA firms. And we'll get to that in a second about how you have these synergies across the different businesses, and so that they're all working kind of for you, right? So I'm able to combine forces and combine things together, and it reminds me a lot of like the Planet of the Apes, one of the Planet of the Apes movies, the monkey, Caesar, right? He grabs a stick and he's like, ape alone weak, and he snaps the stick, and then he puts all the sticks together and he's like, ape together strong, and he braces it, right? Like he can't break the stick. And that's what it is when you acquire businesses, because they all become more valuable, they all become more like synergistic. You're sharing resources amongst the companies, and they all become more valuable having acquired them, right? And we'll talk about that maybe in a different episode about the equity multiples, right? Like if I have a $3 million firm that nets 1 million over here, and I got a $3 million firm over here that nets 1 million, you leave them alone, they're only worth 3 million. You combine them together, now they're worth 8, because they're trading at a $2 million, $2 million EBITDA is going to trade for a 4 to 5x multiple on that, right? That's the thing that real estate doesn't have, that business ownership does have. If I got $1 million property in Chicago and $1 million property in Miami, they don't just suddenly become worth more, me having both of them. But if I got $1 million firm in Miami and $1 million firm in Chicago, now they're worth 2.5 or 3 million, probably $3 million combined because of those synergies, right? So think about that, and it just allows you to exit at a higher multiple, right? So if I'm trading at a 5x multiple and I go and buy a firm at a 2x multiple and I roll it into mine, like I've instantly turned that value into 2x to 5x, right? So if I'm trading at 5x EBITDA, I buy a firm for 1x EBITDA for 1 million, right? Well, now it's worth 5 million because I just rolled it up into my higher valued thing, right? It's kind of weird, but that's the power of like firm acquisition. So the next sort of point is like I actually think that it's cheaper to grow through acquisition than it is through organic slash paid route. So I kind of broke this math down, and if you see me looking down at my screen, it's because I came prepared for this, and I have the math in front of me. So let's do the math. So if I have, let's just say I have 300 clients, the average person pays 10 grand, and I have a $3 million firm, right? Just basic math, making it easy for everybody, right? So I have 300 clients, they each pay 10 grand. Well, if I want to double it and I want to get 300 more people that are going to pay 10 grand, what does that cost look like, right? If I want to go from 3 million to 6 million total, like what does that cost look like? Well, we're booking qualified calls for $150 a call. And remember, because they're cold and you're trying to sell them something that's super expensive, they're going to need a lot of a lot of warming up time. And you're probably only going to close 1 out of 10 of those people into a $10,000 offer, right? So we would need to spend $1,500 in ads to get one customer. But think about this, right? So if I'm closing 1 out of 10, I would need to get 3,000 calls booked to close 300. Like 3,000 people on the phone to close 300. But it's not just the 3,000 calls that get booked. I really need like 3,400 to 3,500 calls because it's cold traffic. Probably 20% of them are not going to show up, right? So 3,500 multiplied by 150, it's $500,000, $525,000 just in ad costs, right? That doesn't include sales commissions. Probably add on another 100,000. You're already at $625,000. Now we have to also include marketing costs like media buyers, things like that. You're really at like 675 to 700. Also, think about the time that it takes to do 3,000 calls. Like if you had 3 people that were taking 5 calls a day, 100 calls a month, it would take you an entire year to get to that point where you can have all those people, and it would literally break your systems. Like if you took on 300 clients at 10K a pop, those are high value clients. Like you're going to break your systems if you don't have it set up in place, right? So you need to have more staff. Like you're going to need 3 or 4 more admin staff. You're going to need 3 more CPAs. You're talking having to pay CPAs in the $120,000 to $150,000 range, an additional $150K in admin cost. So you're literally looking at $1.2 to $1.3 million in costs and a year of time in order to double your growth, or you just do it immediately by buying a firm. Now, is the firm going to have the same metrics in terms of the clients spending the same amount of money? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of the firms that you might buy are going to have clients that aren't up to market value per se. And there's going to be some weeding out of like the bad clients, of course, right? But like when you run the math on how much it would cost you to grow it organically, and we didn't even talk about the fact that that's assuming like all the staff work out well and they're properly trained, and you have to put that time into training the CPAs, right? Well, I had a friend who paid recruiter $25,000 to grab somebody from a big 4 firm, and 3 months in, the guy doesn't show up to meetings. He's probably moonlighting. He needs to be fired. And it's like, well, now my friend's out 3 months of payroll and the 25K that he paid the recruiter. So like hiring is super expensive versus you can look at the company and see how long the CPAs have been there. It doesn't mean they're amazing, right? Just because they've been there for 7 or 15 or 20 years, but it's probably a good track record that they're loyal to the company, right? So that's about it. Wrapping up about the reason why I decided to acquire a firm. This is kind of just the surface level analyzing it. I still have to do another video about the deal structure, like how I actually structure the deal, give you guys some tips. Got to go over the cons of doing this, like what I've noticed in the month that I've owned the firm now, and just all this other stuff to kind of give you guys a full picture of what entrepreneurship, business ownership, acquiring businesses, selling businesses looks like, because I want to give you guys a full transparent picture. And so if you enjoyed this, make sure you share with somebody else, share with one of your friends. That would be great. It would help me a lot. And I'll see you guys on the next episode.